In this video, we're going to talk about how to paint an army for Legions Imperialis. At this point, I've painted 4 or 5 armies of various sizes for the game, and so today I'm going to try to pass on some of the lessons I've learned that I think will help you be successful, especially if this is your first time painting a Legions Imperialis army. Now, if we're to believe Marcus Aurelius, success arises from understanding the true nature of things. So let's look at the nature of the task set before us. Now, the first thing we have to do is accept that Legions Imperialis is a game first and an artistic endeavor second. And while these miniatures are plenty detailed enough that you can spend a great deal of time on them and make them look really spectacular, this is not in general going to be productive simply because there is so much to paint and because much of your work is never going to be seen. Now, to be victorious, we must know the enemy and ourselves. And to understand the enemy, we need to understand what comprises a Legions Imperialis army, and also what we need to do in order to paint one. The second part we need to understand is ourselves, our limits and capabilities. What are you able to do, and how skillfully are you able to do it? On screen right now is some footage of one of my Legions Imperialis armies. This is about 2/3 of a full 3,000 point force, so you can see that there are already a lot of miniatures involved, and even more in building a full army. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't have great games at 2,000 or even 1,000 points, but 3,000 points is the benchmark, and it's the standard expectation of Legions Imperialis games. That's a good visual, but let's break it down a bit more concretely. Now, if you've seen my video on army building called How to Fight and Win, you know that we give a rough estimate in that video for the number of detachments you should have, approximately, in a full army. That's what you can see on the left. On the right is a rough estimate of the number of models in total from all of those detachments. Now, obviously this is going to vary based on how exactly you build your army, but it should give you a general idea of what a full Legions Imperialis army might ask of you. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not trying to scare anybody off, and I don't think you should get intimidated. But you should be realistic about what a full army entails and whether you're prepared to make that commitment. And that's what this video is designed to help you get through. This leads us to a very important maxim that we have to accept if we're going to successfully paint an army for Legions Imperialis in a reasonable amount of time. And that is simply that once you have painted one of these models, especially infantry or other smaller figures, you are never going to see it that closely again. And while yes, it's true that occasionally you may pick it up, admire it, and then set it back down, when you're playing the actual game, you're going to see these very small figures from 3 feet away. And you just have to accept, if you're going to accomplish this, that is the standard that we're looking for, is for it to look good on the table at arm's length, and for the army as a whole to have a collective, completed image. Alright, now let's talk about a more complex topic, ourselves. In military theory, there are 2 concepts that I'm going to call here mental and physical horizons. The first comes from research done in World War II, which suggests that when a military unit nears a 100% replacement rate, it will start to fall apart no matter what is done to reconstitute it. The second, what I'm calling a physical horizon, is the idea that an army can march only so far, even when it is facing minimal resistance, before the challenges of logistics and command drain it of all momentum. Those same challenges apply to us as individuals. Although everyone is different, we all have our own mental and physical horizons that place a hard limit on what we can do and how long we can do it for. And if we're going to be successful in painting an army, and really in anything, we need to take those horizons into account. So let's talk first about overcoming the mental horizon. This is all about limiting the things that we have to do in order to paint our army. And it's also the most conceptually complex. My rule for overcoming the mental horizon is to try to paint without painting, which I know sounds crazy, but let me give you an example of what I mean. This is part of a painting by Velázquez. Now, just looking at it, it seems incredibly detailed. The dress, the facial features, the drapery, all look like they have been meticulously represented. But this isn't so. Let's take a look at a fragment of the very same painting, showing the left hand. As you can see, the brush strokes are very rough and almost shapeless. Even the jeweled rings on her fingers are just little strips and dots of color that would be unrecognizable if you didn't already know what they are. So what am I trying to say? Well, I'm saying that for your army to look good on the table, you need to think less in terms of individual models and more in terms of its aggregate effect. To do this, we need to use high payoff techniques. That is to say, knowing how to break up models so that they are not monolithic blocks of color, using quick shades and washes to give the impression of depth, using contrasting base colors, so having a light base with a dark model or a dark base with a light model. And maybe most importantly, using bright colors on our miniatures so that they stand out on the table. All of this means that you need to choose your color scheme wisely, and you also need to limit the number of steps that is involved in that color scheme, and doing so will really make a huge difference in your success. Let's take a look at a couple of example Solar Auxilia color schemes. I'll talk through how I would go about painting them, and discuss why or why not it would make a good color scheme to use in Legions Imperialis. The first example is this Proximum Sacramenti auxiliary. My first step would probably be to undercoat it with a dark gray, maybe something lighter than is shown here, maybe a step up from charcoal gray. After that, I'd use a nice deep off green and then a brass color for the backpack. I wouldn't mess around with the bronze collars on his gauntlets and greaves, but I think I would paint his faceplate. After that, I'd give his las rifle a coat of black, give him a quick wash, and call it done. Overall, I think this would be a pretty good scheme as long as you don't go too dark with the green. It only takes 4, maybe 5 steps, and they'd all take minimal effort. For the Archite Palatines, I would again start with a dark gray base coat, and then paint his top half with our red wine color. Then I'd paint his greaves, thigh plates, chest, and faceplate with silver, and then we can paint his backpack with brass or bronze, and then his rifle in black. Give him a wash, and he's done. This one is a little bit more complex because of the 2 armor colors, but I think what maybe puts it above the Proximum Sacramenti is the brightness of the metal armor and the richness of the wine red. These will really stand out on the table. The Calibanite Jaegers would again get a dark gray base coat, followed by black on their armor and rifle, dark green on their shoulder pad, and then a bronze on their faceplate and backpack. This scheme seems pretty simple, but it has a couple of issues. The first is that there isn't much to separate the different elements of the model. Everything is black or a slightly darker black. I think this scheme would look very sharp on some 28mm auxiliaries, but for Legions Imperialis, I think it will be difficult to make these look painted, simply because it's all going to blend together when you look at this 6mm tall figure from arm's length or 3 feet away on the tabletop. The Saturnine Rams are sort of the opposite. They have a very bright color scheme, but one which presents a different problem. I'd start by base coating everything the sky blue of the undersuit and then going in to paint the metal armor. After that, I'd do the bronze pack, the black rifle, and then the cream gloves, boots, and upper arms. Now this scheme gets a lot of points for being bright and colorful, but it is also going to require quite a few extra steps from you, particularly because of all of the different cream elements. Each of these steps takes time, and you might be saying that these are tiny figures, and how much time could it really take? Well, let's go back and look at the breakdown of our army. As we're thinking about working through this horizon, part of that is prioritizing our time. I said at the beginning of this video that we have to accept that most models we'll never look at again after we paint them. This is especially true for infantry, but as models get bigger and more important, we need to prioritize those models. But we can afford to do that for several reasons. The first, of course, is that the payoff is much greater. A well-painted Titan or Lance of Knights is going to grab attention and will lift your army up. But you can afford to spend an hour or two on these because you're painting far fewer of them, and the impact is much higher. When it comes to vehicles and walkers, the equation changes some. Because you're probably painting somewhere around 20 of each, we have to start being careful of how much time we invest in them. The exact same can be said for infantry, but to a much greater degree. Because we may be painting so many of them, every step we add begins to accumulate geometrically. Taking the numbers here as a baseline, each second you spend on one infantry model is going to increase your painting time by 8 minutes. Once again, I'm not trying to scare you off here, but I want you to be realistic about the energy that you will have to invest in your army. Everyone's time, attention, and willpower are limited resources, and if we're going to be successful in painting our Legions Imperialis army, we have to spend them wisely. Could you spend an hour on each infantry model and paint them to competition level? Absolutely. But you have to understand two things. The first is that it's going to take you a very, very, very long time to finish your army. And once it is finished, most of that work is never going to be seen ever again. Now let's talk about our physical horizon. And what I mean by this is staging your work so that you have a series of concrete, fixed goals that you are working towards. These will help you keep from losing steam while painting your Legions Imperialis army. There are 3 principles that I'm going to suggest to you today. Build only what you need, paint only what you build, and play more than you paint. Let's look at each principle individually. I think lots of people, including myself, have the immediate impulse to assemble everything in a box when they buy it, assuming, I think, that they intend to use it all, or maybe not wanting to waste miniatures that they've bought. I think this is a mistake, though, because it starts us on the road to burnout. When I say that you should build only what you need, I'm saying that you should plan out your army first, and then build what you need for that army. So, put together an army list for maybe 1,000 points, and then build those miniatures. Then paint them and play with them. Then do the same for 2,000, and then 3,000, or even smaller increments if you need to. Doing this will give you a solid, concrete, and manageable goal, while also giving you the chance to learn about the game through playing. As you learn, you'll find out what you like and what you don't like, which will guide you as you expand your army. If you build your whole force at 3,000 points from the very beginning, you won't have a chance to learn your preferences, and you may end up building and painting miniatures that you won't want to use. Similar thoughts underlay the second principle. By only painting what you have built, you give yourself a concrete goal to work towards. Instead of having a vast sea of gray plastic in front of you, you have a much more manageable project. Painting in stages will also give you the chance to learn how to paint effectively, and you can find out what techniques do and don't work for you, your paint scheme, and your painting style. Painting in stages will also give you the chance to change focus. If you end up not liking how a scheme came out, or if it's too much work, it will be far easier to change if you've only painted 1,000 points rather than 3,000. Legions Imperialis also gives us an out, as the idea of independent formations means that it makes a bit more sense to have different color schemes and even different factions on the table. The last, and I think most important principle, is to play more than you paint. GW knows that people buy far more miniatures than they ever paint, and I think it's obvious that they base their business model around that presumption. The problem with this is beyond the scope of the video, but for our purposes it should simply be said that it is a lot easier to buy something than it is to sit down at the painting table and paint up an entire army. This becomes even more true if the end goal of painting the army is far off in the future. It's going to be really easy to put it off, and then ultimately give up entirely, because there's no immediate pressure to finish your army. If you play games regularly and often, you'll have a firm and present goal to achieve, and that is going to help you keep motivated to paint your army. By playing regularly, you're also going to learn more about the game, and you're going to feel more proficient and effective on the table, which will motivate you further to paint and paint well. By playing regularly, you'll also learn about what you like to use on the table and what is effective in the game. You'll avoid painting models you don't want to use, which will prevent you from wasting effort and getting discouraged. Alright, we've covered a lot in this video, so let's just go over everything in brief. Before you start your Legions Imperialis army, make sure you understand what you're getting into. Understand that a Legions Imperialis army involves a lot of miniatures, many of which are not going to reward lengthy or intricate paintwork. Understand also yourself and how much time you will realistically be able to invest in painting. Doing this will allow you to properly apportion the time that you do have and spend it most effectively on the models that will reward the effort you invest in them. Second, understand your mental and your physical horizons. Know that we all have our limits, and make sure that you use high payoff techniques that will save you time and effort. Use bright, powerful colors that break up the silhouette of your model. Use pin washes to give depth without dulling your main colors. Likewise, choose your color scheme wisely and keep the number of painting steps limited. By building only what you need, painting only what you build, and playing more than you paint, I promise that you will be successful and that you will have a good-looking Legions Imperialis army on the table with a minimum of heartache. I know that was a bit more of a philosophical video, but I am hoping to have some actual painting videos coming out very soon where I can show you exactly how I paint my own Legions Imperialis miniatures. If you have your own tips and tricks for painting Legions Imperialis armies, make sure to share them down in the comments. Like and subscribe so this video can get to more people interested in painting their own Legions Imperialis armies, and I'll see you in the next video.